Well, the 3-year-old child who was born to a South African woman imprisoned in Mozambique for drug-related crimes is due to be repatriated. A South African delegation from the Department of Social Development has arrived in Maputo, Mozambique to repatriate the toddler who was born in prison. Between 2008 and 2015, 18 South African children in distress have been repatriated from foreign countries. Elzemari Temperman is an attorney at Lawyers for Human Rights. She's also the manager for Refugees and Migrants' Rights Clinic. We chat to her now from our Pretoria studios. Good afternoon, Elzemari. Thank you so much for your time on the News Today desk.
Good afternoon, Karishni. Happy to be here. Thank you.
Minister of Social Development, Batapela Dlamini, she has tried very hard in the past few years to put a more human touch, if you want, on the process of repatriation. What are some of the key factors that have to be considered when it comes to successful repatriation of minors, Elzemari?
Well, first of all, we definitely support any initiative from the Minister in ensuring that the children's interest, the child's best interest is ensured during repatriation. From experience, I can say that when we prepare a child for repatriation, we first of all need to arrange someone to accompany the child, for example, the social worker. Secondly, we need to arrange who is going to pay for the funding for the repatriation. Thirdly, we need to look at whether the child has any documentation. If not, we need to get consent from the relevant authorities to ensure that the child can cross the border. And then lastly, we also need to consider, once the child is back in their country of origin, whether or not there is a place of safety that would accept them. For example, a shelter or a family member.
Elzemari, we want this process to be as smooth as possible, with emotional stress minimal for the minor, but it's not always the case. What are some of the barriers to successful repatriation on the ground, would you say?
Well, I would say some of the barriers could definitely be when the child is not documented, because then that will take time, and we need to get the necessary authorities' consent to have the child cross the borders. Also, like the social worker indicated previously, that the child will have to build a relationship with the social worker in order to feel comfortable to travel to this country, and in this instance, a country that they have never seen before.
All right. South Africa is obligated by the Children's Act 38 of 2005 to repatriate minors living in distress in foreign countries. That's what we call them, so that then these kids can access international social services rendered. In this particular case, one child has been born in a foreign prison, but under what other conditions would we define a child as one in distress, Elzemari?
Well, the Children's Act defines whether or not a child is in need of care and protection in Chapter 9. So ultimately, the Children's Court will have to determine whether a specific child is in need of care and protection and should be placed in shelter. And in this instance, the Department of Social Development definitely does an investigation, and then they will approach the Children's Court for an order in order to repatriate the child, especially in this instance without any documentation.
Elzemari, you've mentioned documentation, a crucial prerequisite for successful repatriation. Can you just elaborate for us the definition of an undocumented foreign migrant child? Do we include in that the definition of children of asylum seekers? Can you explain this distinction between an accompanied and unaccompanied foreign migrant child?
Well, first of all, Karishni, when an asylum seeker has children and they do have a file at the Refugee Reception Office, that child will be disclosed in the file, and that child will then automatically be documented. An undocumented foreign migrant child is a child that crosses the borders and does not have any proof of who they are, or their identity, or their date of birth. So ultimately, we need to look at whether the child is unaccompanied, and if so, then the Department of Social Development does an investigation. And if not, if the child is accompanied by a major who is not either a family member or a legal guardian, then we have to look into the fact whether this major person can actually apply for documentation on behalf of the minor.
All right, very quickly, we are running out of time. Speak to us of some of the shortfalls in our current legislation meant to protect and provide for migrant and refugee and unaccompanied minors at that.
Well, our constitution provides protection for all children. We do not distinguish between foreign children and South African children. So first of all, we should treat all children the same, but unfortunately there are instances where foreign children do have access problems. For example, access to education, access to healthcare, and like I mentioned previously, access to documentation. But LHR is looking into this matter.
Elzemari Temperman, she's an attorney at the Lawyers for Human Rights, manager for the Refugee and Migrants' Rights Clinic in Pretoria. Thank you for your time on the News Today desk.